To talk further about the Islamic State, we're joined by Thomas Sanderson from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's either authored or co-authored 13 major CSIS reports. One of them, which I was reading, it talks about this narrow focus, that we tend to have this narrow focus instead of a broader look at all of this sort of thing. And I'm thinking about the coverage that we're seeing now, beheadings, these guys being marched off, executed the other day. It seems like our focus is on that, but I don't think we're actually trying to get into the mindset. Why is ISIS being successful? What are they doing in terms of governance? What are they doing in terms of battlefield strategy? What are some things we need to know about them?
Well, they are incredibly successful on all of those fronts. Though I would say on the governance side, that's a little bit more difficult. And they are learning some lessons from the past when they did govern parts of Western Iraq. During our time there, they over-governed. They were too extreme in how they treated the local folks, teaching them how to pray again and learning new things like that, and very, very oppressive to those areas. They've done that in Syria to some degree, but they've learned those lessons, so they are smarter about meeting people's needs, of stepping in where the government stepped out as far as providing for services, or where governments never provided those services. They have a very good playing field in which to operate because there's been such poor governance in these areas. On the battlefield, they are incredibly effective. They've been fighting other militant groups, as well as to some degree the Syrian armed forces as well, and Iraqi security forces, and now U.S. and Kurdish forces. So they are skilled. They have many, many years of this, and they demonstrate that in their successes.
The interesting thing, I think, which most of the people in the West don't think about, is the people living in these areas where they've seen violence and chaos. If there's stability, they might find that more advantageous, perhaps, and that's why you don't see some of this resistance. Would you agree?
Sure, in certain areas. One thing that local folks do appreciate very much is the lack of corruption that ISIS has. And that sounds strange to us, given how brutal they are, but they're replacing governments that were highly corrupt. So you have people that are used to local police or local soldiers or government officials who are abusing them, taxing them in ways that they shouldn't be. And so ISIS comes in, cleans that up, and sets down what are strict but fair, in their minds, practices. They also subsidize food, they mend wounds, they provide for services in ways that the government never could. They are extremely severe in their punishment for rules that are broken. But the point is, as you said, they do bring some degree of stability for these people.
The president has been criticized. In fact, the White House and the Pentagon backpedaling a lot today about we don't have a strategy. But is coming up with a strategy more than just bombing and attacking? I mean, there needs to be more, correct?
Sure. Without a doubt. And I think that Americans and many others tend to think, because of America's military capability, that we can bring that to bear against a group like ISIS, and it takes so much more. It's just one small part of the overall package. First of all, we need to get the local folks to be doing things they need to do, and that's political reform, getting their militaries in shape, the economy going, and bringing people into a more inclusive form of government. Those things are unbelievably important. If those things are not done, our military will only be successful in certain targeted strikes. We cannot bring stability to this region without the local actors doing their part.
Slogans and catchphrases tend to go over very well domestically. There's the war on drugs, the war on terror. It sounds great, but if you look at the track record on the war on drugs, drugs are still very prevalent here in the United States. The war on terror, it seems as though there's been a lot of talk about how 2/3 of the leadership of Al-Qaeda has been wiped out, and yet ISIS seems worse than Al-Qaeda. So is there another way?
Well, certainly things change as time goes on, and a couple of years ago we did have Al-Qaeda's back against the wall in many areas, with the senior leadership in Pakistan essentially bunkered and not being able to communicate well with the other affiliates. However, those affiliates were doing pretty well. And as you point out, ISIS is not part of Al-Qaeda. They are surging. They are trending very positively from their perspective. So you constantly need to treat this, which is a recipe that has many ingredients. You have to look at the causes for these young guys going into these groups. You have to go back to where they're coming from. You have to look at all of the different elements that draw them to the battle, and the military is only one part of that solution.
Thomas, thanks so much. If you can answer this briefly. The question I have is the Arab Spring. There seemed like everyone was excited about it, democracy spreading everywhere, and now we're looking at a region that looks like it's in flames. What happened?
Well, we have an Arab Spring hangover is what we have, and we certainly don't have governments that emerged out of this great hope. People thought that there would be a great change, but look, we had a lot of people who displaced governments in old dictators who had no experience running governments, and people no experience choosing leaders. And you also had no economy, and you still have no economy, so you have millions of young men and women with unmet expectations that were there before and they remain there now. So you still have a tremendous amount of work to be done. I think it was incredibly realistic to think that we would be turning a page in the Middle East and bright sunshine would come in and jobs would emerge and democracy would flourish and militancy would be gone. Not even close.
That's sort of a fairy tale, I guess. Thomas, thanks so much for coming in.
You're
Certainly
welcome.
appreciate it.